Welcome back everyone to part 3 of our interaction system series, and in this part we will be building our player interaction actor component. This is the component that will contain all of the logic required to allow our player to interact with objects in the world. Actor components are an essential building block when creating systems in Unreal Engine. So if you want to learn more about them in detail, I have a full video describing the component design pattern, so check it out if you want to learn how to write maintainable code. We will also be adding an interact animation, and we will also be using the enhanced input system instead of hard coding our key bindings. As always, the full project files are available to download on my Patreon, and you'd be supporting me a great deal by checking it out. Now, let's get started. Alright, so the first step is to create the actor component. So I'm going to go into my interaction system folder here, right-click new blueprint class, and click on actor component. And I'm just going to call this the player interaction component. And then we open it up. It looks like a normal blueprint. But before we start adding anything here, the second step is to use this actor component. And the way we use it is I'm going to go to my player character. So this is the third person character. And just like we have a character movement component here, I'm going to add a new component and search for the one I just created. And I'll find player interaction component. So adding an actor component to a blueprint adds additional functionality to this blueprint. So just like adding character movement component gives this character movement, and then you have a whole bunch of things to configure here. Same with the player interaction component. The only difference is right now this is empty and it's not doing anything. So we want to move all of the logic related to interaction from our player class to this actor component. And the reason we do this is to separate the logic of the player pawn from the logic of the player interaction. That way we can build them in isolation, which makes it a lot easier to maintain and reuse. And I will be showing you how as we progress in this series. Alright, and now let's start moving this logic to the player interaction component. And in the previous tutorial, I purposefully built all of this here in the third person character to show you the difference between what it looks like to add the same pieces of code, the same logic in a dedicated class versus in a generic component. So let's now look at the difference. First thing we want to move is this interactables in range. So if you remember, this is just an array or a list of interactables that we add any interactable to it when we enter its range, and we remove it when we exit its range. So I'm just going to copy this and go to my player interaction component and paste it. This is not going to be any different, so it's just going to be the same thing as in the player blueprint. So we're not going to do anything different here. I'm just going to copy this over. Next is these two things. This is, if you recall, the on-begin overlap and on-end overlap of the capsule component, so the collision of the player. So when the collision capsule of the player overlaps with any interactable object, we add it to the array of interactables, and when it ends overlapping, we remove it from the array. So we need to build this logic now in our player interaction component. But here becomes the biggest difference. Remove this tick. Right now we don't have a capsule. Here we can just click on our capsule and then we scroll down to our events and we clicked on component begin overlap. Or you can also get the capsule component itself here and then pull off and say bind to overlap. No, that's the wrong overlap. Bind to component begin overlap. So this is any function you put here in this custom event. So these two are identical. The only difference is this we got by clicking here and gives you a nice UI to add it. Whereas this you need to plug it in somewhere. So you start binding at a certain point of execution, whereas this automatically does the bind for you when the component or when this blueprint is loaded. So that's just the difference. But in both cases, you need a reference to your capsule to be able to get this event. So how do we get a reference to our capsule in our player interaction component? Well, this is where the function getOwner comes into play. And getOwner, if you read the message, it says follow the outer chain to get the actor that owns this component. So this means that it keeps going up the chain of ownership until it finds an actor that is using this component. And in our case, the chain is directly above us, so we get the player interaction component is directly used by the third-person character. So getOwner here returns a third-person character. But if we hover, the type is not third-person character. The type is actor object reference, because getOwner doesn't know which type of actor is using this component. It could be any actor. It could be a pawn, a character, third-person character, or any other custom blueprint. So I can't pull off this actor and say getCapsule. This doesn't exist. So I need to cast this owner to something that I know has a capsule. So I can do something like cast to third-person character. Now I have a reference to my third-person character, which I know has a capsule. So I can say get capsule. And we're going to scroll all the way here, get capsule component. And then I can do all of my bind to overlap, begin, and all that. This is one way to do it, but not the preferred way. Let me tell you why. What I've done right now is I have limited myself. I have limited the use of this interaction component to be only used by a third-person character. That means if I add this component to any other type of blueprint, then this cast will fail, and then everything after it will fail as well, and the component won't work. And this is called creating a hard dependency between the third-person character and the player interaction component. And I don't want to create this dependency. Right now, I don't foresee a use case where anyone other than third-person character will use it, but I want to have the option in the future. So what I'm going to do is instead of casting to the third-person character, I can also cast to just character. Because third-person character is a child of character, and I know that characters also have capsule components, because by default a character has a capsule. So I can do this, and now I just created a dependency between character and this component. That means that only classes of type character can use this, and that's fine. It gives me a lot more freedom to create any custom character and be able to assign this component to it. And of course, if you don't want this, then on cast fail, you can have a fallback. Say, okay, so if someone is trying to use this and they're not a character, then do something else. But for me, this is enough. So I'm just going to pull off of this and say custom event. And this will be my handle over capsule. Let's call it handle capsule overlap begin. Great. And we want to do the same thing for the overlap end. So I'm just going to also pull and say bind to overlap on component end overlap. And same thing here, custom event, call it handle capsule overlap end. All right, so now we have the two functions here. We can just copy everything here and put it there. But before we do that, I just want to clean this up a tiny bit. So I'm going to disconnect these nodes and I'm going to move them here to be like separate events. And here, instead of connecting them directly, I'm just going to pull off and say create. And when I say create event, then it's going to ask me to select an event that has a matching signature. Signature just means these inputs. So this is the handle overlap begin, pull off of this, create event, handle overlap end. That way it's cleaner. So this is just more like an input and I can have more space to write my code here. All right, so this, I'm just gonna copy all of this here. Nothing different, plug it in. This will be the actor and this will also be the actor. All right, and same thing here, copy, paste, actor, actor. All right, so this is the difference between building something in a component. It's generic. It gets the owner. It says, I don't know what type of owner are you, but I expect you to be a character. And I'm going to get your capsule component and I'm going to do this. So here, the only difference is I know that I have a capsule component and I can bind directly to this event. All right, so now I don't need these two anymore. I can actually just delete them. And this interactables in range, I can also delete. Oh, it says I'm using it somewhere. Where am I using it? Right click, find references. Oh, of course, I'm using it here to interact with it. Okay, I'm also going to copy this over, just as is. I'm going to copy it or cut it, and then paste it here. We're going to be modifying this a bit, but so far, this is going to work just fine. All right, so if I compile, oh, it says I have an error here. Okay, this is another problem. So previously here, when we were calling this, we were passing the interactor. So this is who is the class that's currently interacting with this item. And we say it's self because it's the third person character that's interacting with this item. But in our component, self is not an actor. Self is an actor component. So again, here we can't pass self. We have to get owner. And the owner is the interactor because owner is of type actor and interactor is also of type actor. All right, and now compiling should work. And if we test this out, I'm gonna play. Let's make sure all of our logic's still there. Yeah, interacting works. Interacting works. Perfect. So as you can see, the player character now, the third person character, is back to its default state. This is the code that came with the third person template, and I didn't add anything. All I did was simply add this component. So if I delete it now, I'm just gonna delete this component, and I'm gonna try to interact. Nothing happens, of course, because there is no logic for interaction. And just by adding this component and doing nothing else, I now am able to interact. All right, another very quick improvement I want to make is our input. So instead of this keyboard action that I'm hard coding here, I want to replace this with the input action system. So I'm going to go to my third person folder, input and actions. Here is where we have the input actions that come with the third person template. So I'm going to right click and search for input action and choose this one and name it IA for input action underscore interact. So right now I'm not going to change any of the triggers or modifiers. So I'm going to keep those as is, but we are going to be modifying them in the next part. But what we do need to do is map this action to a key. And we do this in this input mapping context. So also in the third person input folder. And I'm going to click this plus icon. And I'm going to search for my interact action. And if I expand this, now I want to assign a key that triggers this action. So I'm just going to click on this keyboard icon, which now records what I press on my keyboard. And I'm just going to press E. And of course, you can do the same. You can add another one for a gamepad and so on. For now, I'm just going to use this one keyboard action. All right, so now when I press E on the keyboard, it triggers this input action. And now back in my player interaction component, I'm going to delete this E key and search for IA interact, this one. And I'm not going to do it on triggered because right now triggered is going to be called multiple times as like on tick while the key is pressed. So I'm going to do it on start, which will only be called once. But again, we're going to be diving into more details about this input action in the next part. But for now, this is still going to work when I press E and I can pick up and I can interact. And now it's a lot more cleaner and we can do a lot more with this input action, which I'm going to show you soon. All right, now the last thing I want to do is add a quick animation when we interact. Right now, I have this animation that I actually recorded with the Rococo motion capture suit. It's a very simple animation, so it was very easy to act out and record and barely needed to do any editing afterwards. But I am going to create a montage out of this and modify it a bit. And also, if you want this animation, you can get it on my Patreon. Link is in the description as well as on the screen. But otherwise, you can also use any animation you want from Mixamo or any custom animations that you have, and it should be just the same. So I'm going to now right-click on this animation and say create anim montage. And I'm going to call it montage underscore interact. Let's open it up. Now I want this animation to be a lot faster, and I don't want it to end with the character putting something behind their back. So I'm going to actually end it a lot sooner. So I want it to end like probably, yeah, around here or something. So let's change the end time to be 1.93 seconds. So now the animation is just this. And I want it to be a lot faster, so I'm going to change the play rate to be 2.5. So now it's 2.5 times faster. All right, and that's my animation. So right now, back in our player interaction component, when we call the interact input, or when we press the interact input, we call the interact function right away. And then this interacts and either opens the door, adds the item to the inventory, and so on. Instead, what we want here is for the animation to play, and when the animation reaches a certain point, like here, for example, then the interact function is called. So to do that, we need to add a notify in the animation to notify us when we reach a certain point. So when we reach here, for example, I'm going to right-click under the notifies track. You're going to see one. This is the first notify track. So right-click here and say add notify montage. Make sure montage notify is the one you add. And then we're going to click on it, and then under notify name here, we're going to give it a name. I'm going to call it interact with a capital I. This name is very important. And then back here in my player interaction component, let's see how we're going to use this montage. So I'm going to move all of this. Actually, I'm going to move all of this away for now. And now I want to play a montage when on start here. So I'm going to pull off start and say play montage. And this is the one I want. And I'm going to select my montage here. And I also need a skeletal mesh. So if you recall, we are still in an actor component. So I don't have any components here to get a skeletal mesh from. I can't just go to my third person and pull my mesh here, of course. But what I can do is I can get the owner. And as you know, like above here, we did the same. We cast the owner to a character to get the capsule component. And the character also has a mesh, so we can get the mesh from a character as well. So I'm just going to promote this character to a variable in case we want to use it anywhere else. So I'm going to right-click, promote to, or just pull off and say promote to variable. Whoops, sorry. Promote to variable, and we're going to call it the character ref. So reference to our character. All right, and now here we can use the character ref instead of get owner. We can get our character ref and then get the mesh from that. And that will be our skeletal mesh. All right, so now we have a montage that plays, but we want to check when the montage reaches a certain point or when this notify occurs. So to do that, we pull off of the on notify begin. So I can do something like on notify begin, I'm going to do a branch. And I want to check what notify just occurred. So to do that, I can get my notify name and check, is this equal to interact? So make sure to spell it exactly the same as you spelled it in the notify. So if a notify began and that notify had the name interact, then call the interact function. So that's how you would do something like that. And let's test this out now. If I go here, I interact with my door. Nice. Very cool. There's a problem now is that the animation is always going to play when I press the E key. Maybe you don't want the animation to play when you press the E key. Maybe you want the animation to play when an interact actually happens. So to do that, I'm going to first check if there is an interactable in range before doing anything else. So let's move all of this here, and I'm going to check, do a branch, and get my interactables in range, and check is not empty. And if this array is not empty, that means there is an interactable in range. Then continue. So now if we play, I'm pressing E, nothing's happening because there are no interactables in range. Now, plays the animation, picks up the item. Very nice. Excellent.
Next up in part 4, the interaction widget.
All right, now that I have your attention, that was the end of part 3, and indeed in part 4, we will be building our interaction widget. And this is my favorite part, because we're going to be creating a widget and then spawning it in the 3D world calculating where to place it in the place between the player and the interactable object, and then updating its location as the player moves. And we will be doing all of that in isolation within our actor component without creating any dependencies on the rest of our game. Meaning that you can easily extend this system regardless of what type of game you're working on, and you can easily move it from one project to another and just have it work out of the box just by adding the actor component to the player character, and boom, widget appears. So I'm very excited about this. And if you're not already subscribed, why? Why aren't you subscribed? Come on, click that button to get notified whenever I release a new video in this series. And if you want to download the full project files of this series, all the other series, every asset from every tutorial that I've ever worked on, get early access to my videos, access to my chatbot, and a lot more benefits, check out my Patreon page. You'll be supporting me, supporting the channel, and making all of these videos possible. So again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.